welcome back, everyone. I know last week we left our conversation with medical intuition. So let's pick up there because I have been fielding emails from you guys all week about this. But don't worry, we're gonna cover this information, and I'll answer any of your questions as well. So to be clear, medical intuition is the direct observation of another's anatomy and the anatomical functioning of their biology using extrasensory perception. For me, primarily clairvoyance. So I'll repeat. It is the direct observation of the anatomy, the anatomical, biological functioning of another human being. I want to be very clear about this because in recent years, there's been a lot of confusion about exactly what medical intuition is. There are books and things in the marketplace that discuss medical intuition as if it's a way of checking in with oneself to restore or create wellness or wholeness within one's being. And perhaps along the spectrum of possibilities, maybe that's one of them. But I would file this under something called introception. Introception is the awareness of one's anatomical functionings. So think about a baby. A baby has to learn the ability to become aware enough of their body when they have to go potty. If they knew when they had to go potty, we as adults would not be changing diapers, right? They would know, oh, I feel myself getting full, or I feel myself having to pee, and then they would come very quickly to learn, how to take care of that, right? So the introception, the body awareness, is something that develops along with the mind, and it is a natural functioning of self-control and self-awareness, right? Now, this heightened introception, being able to listen to the aches and pains or the sensations of the body, or, kind of observing what food we're craving so it can give us an understanding perhaps of what vitamins or minerals we may be missing. Useful. Again, introception. Okay. Something else that's also been thrown into the bucket of medical intuition is energy work. And I would say that energy work certainly has its place, and energy work may be paired well with medical intuition, but as its own modality, it's not medical intuition. Medical intuition is the direct observation of the anatomical functioning of another's biology, which means using clairvoyance or using clairsentience or a combination of any one of the extrasensory sensitivities that assimilate information into our nervous system. Through these processes, we can directly sense and observe what is going on in another's anatomy. So let me give you some examples. And some of these examples are listed publicly on the website, so I don't feel as if I'm betraying any confidence. So these are people who would have given their permission already to have their private sessions discussed, although I won't use any names. But on the website, we have a video of a client, long-term client. And many years ago, we were doing some work together. And The medical intuitive process for me is there's an intelligence that works through me and guides me and prioritizes information in accordance with my client's well-being. And as the awareness is building out this holographic representation, I begin to see anomalies in the skin along the shoulder. And I identify these as things that should be taken to the dermatologist and looked at because my concern was they were cancerous. There was also an entering into the viscera. So I might feel a pull or a sensation in my own body, and then in the third eye or in projected directly in front of me in this sort of holographic observation it's as if one is now navigating through the viscera and then feeling the texture, seeing the object, having a felt sense of the mass and contents of this structure, confidently saying, hey, look, there's a growth adjacent to your uterus. And here's what it looks like. And this particular client then had herself checked by a dermatologist. That was then removed. The lesions on the skin were removed, and then had imaging work and an investigation of her internal anatomy, looking for that mass that was identified, and they couldn't find it, except 6 or 8 weeks later, this particular client was rushed into emergency surgery where there was a significant sized tumor that was removed right where the process had revealed it. So there's this direct observation of the anatomy, the organs, and then the structures and functioning in the internal body itself. This is like remembering something. So think about how your mind remembers. It will create images or sensations or stories. And so it has that kind of quality as a perceiver. I want you to think about that. It's as if you're replaying something in the awareness, but it's actually happening in real time. And this is not dependent on proximity. The clients that I work with are in Europe and Asia, Australia, South Africa, and all across Canada, the United States, etc. So, the distance doesn't matter. What is important is the quality of the empathic resonance. It's being able to feel that person deeply as if they are my loved one, right? So think about how you may, at one point, I'm certain that we've all lost people that are dear to us, but maybe you get a phone call. It says, hey, you got to go see so-and-so. And you say, yeah, I'm working. I'm going to go tomorrow. And they say, no, you've got to go now. So you go over and you walk into the room and you have a certain expectation of how you'll find this person that you care about. But when you see them, you can feel the energy drain from your head down to your toes. And there's a hollowness in the solar plexus, like someone's pulled a plug and you feel like a gut punch and everything drains out of you. And you look at the person you love and you, in your heart, in that moment, without hesitation, oh my God, they're not going to make it. Right? This capacity to feel the vitality of those we love is critical for doing medical intuitive work. It's to open our being to be receptive to those who come to us for assistance as if they are our loved one. This is the work. And holding that capacity and developing that capacity is the path to doing that work. Now, many people, when they first discover they have the capacity to directly observe the anatomy of others, well, boy, doesn't that become fun, right? It's crazy. It's interesting. Isn't it neat to list every bump and bruise and scar and happenstance that's ever occurred to the body? But listing things is how the psychic develops the confidence to trust their internal awareness as an objectively verifiable factual resource. So even then, when one can observe information accurately, I would split hairs and argue that's not yet medical intuition, because one hasn't developed the capacity to articulate that information in a solution-oriented manner. So being able to tell people what's going on in their anatomy is one thing. It is exciting. It can be fun. But doing it in earnest with people who know they're ill or don't know they're ill, or working with doctors and surgeons who are troubled by a difficult case, or as I hesitate to tell this other dimension, but working with people who are perhaps in coma, or working with parents whose children, either due to autism or due to injury or some other neurological condition, have the inability to communicate their aches and pains and what their needs are, right? Is what I'm talking about is medical intuition. It goes well beyond just being able to list health problems like a carnival barker. It goes into becoming an integral part of a strategy for serving the well-being of others, right? And in that, one has to be mindful of the impact of medical intuition, how the insertion of one's observing awareness into the private spaces of another, the intrusion into the aura, can be felt. And so one has to be very, very careful, not just how they wield the ability, but how they communicate the information they find. Some people will come to the service knowing that they're ill, wanting the psychic to tell them everything's going to be okay. And this is something that I've dealt with repeatedly over the years. And sometimes they're right, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes what's discovered is far worse than what they imagined. And those conversations need to be had skillfully. Because medical intuition is not about, at least how my service is organized, it's not diagnostic. It's not about telling people what to eat or what to drink or what vitamins to take. It's not energy work. It is the ability to provide information for clients to research, validate, and use it to ask better questions of their physicians so they can collaborate more fully and skillfully with their healthcare providers. And when I'm working with doctors and surgeons, it's to guide their decision making, to make them aware of things perhaps that they were unsure of or didn't know about. Hey, check this, look under this organ, or the blood flow here, et cetera, et cetera. This is doing that. And then they do the scans, they conduct the tests, and they find these things, or they use that as information to inform patient care moving forward, right? So the medical intuitive process isn't really about the psychic at all. It's not about the medical intuitive. It's about applying the medical intuitive skill set in service to a higher purpose. And that purpose is the client's needs, whether that is a parent for their child, husband for their wife, wife for their husband, or aging parents. What it isn't is telling people what they should do, right? Because medical intuitives are not physicians. We're not scientists. We're not licensed to give anyone medical advice or diagnose or prescribe. What we do is provide information. And that's important. Information. It doesn't mean that that information can't be profoundly healing. Because this is energetic work, in that the observation of the anatomy can be felt. So earlier I was talking about the need to be careful of the impact of the medical intuitive process. And let me give you an example as to why. Is we have within us the capacity to feel when we're being stared at. This is a survival function, right? If even with some of the work that I do with military and law enforcement is, something I've learned there is that it's taught that when stalking someone, so stalking a suspect, or in military functioning, stalking a adversary for the purpose of arresting or even neutralizing that subject, is they teach don't look directly at the individual as you're sneaking up behind them. Why? Because they can feel that. And think about for yourself, if you are walking down the street or maybe riding public transportation or sitting in your car in traffic and you feel someone staring at you. The medical intuitive process is directing the full embodied awareness into the private personal spaces of another. And for certain hypersensitive people, they can sense that, they can feel it. It can be triggering. So recently I was working with a woman who had lost her hearing inexplicably in her 30s. And this woman was now in her early 60s, and she was wondering, no one can tell me what happened. No one knows why I'm suffering this and other medical causes. And in working with her, I was able to separate the wheat from the chaff in that, no, you have this medical thing and that medical thing. The hearing is something different. It's not part of the overall pathology. And in directly observing the ear, the skull, the brain, she suddenly began to feel sensations in her neck and in the ear and the parietal area of the head where I was observing. And keep in mind, this is someone who's on the telephone, who's somewhere else in the country, 1,500 or 2,000 miles away. And then as I begin to ask specific questions about the functioning of the inner ear, and I made a request to take me down the timeline to the beginning of the hearing loss. And then I said, now, -5 years, -7 years, -10 years, going deeper into the past, observing the functioning of her hearing, waiting for something to show me when it all began to go wrong. When suddenly I felt a concussion to my own head, as if I can feel my brain crashing from one side of the head to the other, as if someone literally slapped me upside the head. And in my ear, from the phone, I hear, "What are you doing?" What's important to point out is that she felt it as I observed it. Right? So the light of our awareness activates the information stored in the anatomy that we're observing. Now, this might sound a little crazy, but think about this now. Haven't you heard of, people who get massages and they burst out crying, or one has an orgasm and their body shakes and they burst out laughing, or they then go switch from laughing to crying. We know that information is stored in the connective tissue and the musculature in the body. Unresolved emotion, thoughts, feelings, impressions, the memories of yesterday. So when doing medical intuitive work, we must be mindful that it's not just some kind of fun display, look what I can do. It's you are interacting with the memories and emotions stored within the person you're serving, which means it requires skill and sensitivity to not just reveal what's being seen, but also manage the feelings and images and sensations that occur alongside the observation of the anatomical functioning. Context matters. Just because there's information stored in the anatomy in a certain area doesn't necessarily mean that's the cause of what happened. It means it's just there. And medical intuitives, they get themselves in trouble all the time trying to give the why something happened. And I get clients, who look for that. They want a metaphysical or, quote, spiritual cause for why they're suffering. And looking for a spiritual cause is not a spiritual process. It's a way to manage anxiety. We have the binary and causal operator in the brain. So when we are going through something, if we can't solve it, at least we want to know why. Why is this happening? If you try to tell why, it can sometimes sound a lot like blaming the client for why they're going through what they're going through. You can talk about past lives and this and that and the other thing, all of that. But the client may interpret that as, well, that's mine, that's me, that's my karma. And it's still a little bit like blame, can lead to hopelessness, even if it does give someone some idea as to why this is happening. Why am I sick? Why am I in pain? What happens in the body belongs to the body. As a practitioner, you are not your body. And if you are going to bring any measure of healing or comfort to those you serve, the last thing you want to reinforce is that you are a body. You are eternal. You are a divine being. You are not your body. When Christ was walking into Jerusalem before Passover at the end of his life, he'd become quite famous. And there were throngs upon throngs of people. So I don't know how many people are in a throng, but I'm going to reckon to say probably thousands. So thousands upon thousands of people lining the road into Jerusalem to get a look at this young rabbi, because I hear he heals people. I hear he feeds people. I hear that he is the Messiah. The Messiah was the prophesized individual who would liberate the Jews from the yoke of their oppressors and reestablish the kingdom of Judea, right? Except here's this rabbi, this young man, 33, walking with his followers. And they're being mobbed. They're being put, there's people are pushing and shoving and trying to get a good look at him, calling his name, trying to get his attention. And I like to imagine just a wild, wild scene when suddenly Christ says, "Who touched me?" And he looks down and he sees a woman. And she says, "Forgive me, Lord. I knew if I could just touch the hem of your garment, my son would be healed." Her son wasn't even there. And he said, "Rise, woman. Your faith has made him whole." He didn't do anything. He didn't heal anyone. In fact, as the story goes, Christ felt someone touch him, and he actually exclaimed, "Who touched me?" And you can imagine Peter saying, "Are you out of your mind? Who touched you? We're getting mobbed here." And Christ said, "No, I felt the virtue leave me." And then he looked down and he saw the woman. And then he said, "Your faith has made him whole." Right? He didn't say, "Stop. I got to do some Reiki." He didn't do anything. What you see in the story is Christ simply said, "I felt the virtue leave me." Meaning, this woman knew deep down that if she could just align her being with the presence of the consciousness of Christ and touch it, that it would know what to do and where it needed to be to restore harmony, the harmony in her son. And it was so. So I don't necessarily abide by medical intuition as being something about, doing energy work per se. Nor do I view the people that come to me as ill. But I do understand that what is of the body is ours to care for. It is not who we are, but we are custodians of that. And the degree to which one is identified with the body is the degree to which one will suffer the ills of the body. So it is important to provide for the comfort of the body. It is important to nurture the relationship to the body. But it also is important to remember that we're not our bodies. And as practitioners, if we can anchor ourselves in being and allow the medical intuitive process, this natural intelligence, to guide and work through us, we bear witness to something that has always been part of the human experience. The innate capacity to feel the well-being of others in us. Now, I'll close in a moment, and I want to take some questions because I know that I'm certain that I'm not hitting every nuance that you all may be confused about. But I wanted to paint with a broad brush. But I also want to tell you this story. Is recently a client was referred. I've told this to some of you in the past because it has a very important message about non-doing and being still and relying on the process to do the work for us. This woman, relatively young woman, 41 years old, had not had a period in 12 years, so she was having considerable medical issues. And also it impacts her own sense of her own identity as a woman, and is impacting her relationship to her husband, and aside from considerable discomfort, and et cetera, et cetera. And she was referred, and I recently spoke to her teacher, her spiritual mentor who referred, and she said, Jack, so and so spent 3 hours with you and she learned a lot. She was really grateful, but in the last 5 minutes of her appointment, you really disappointed her. And I said, okay, well, I'm sorry, but I can only tell you what I see. And she said, no, it's okay. You don't understand. And I said, okay. And she said, well, don't you remember that she flat out asked you, am I in menopause? Because her OBGYN, her GP, and her endocrinologist all concurred that she was in menopause and needed medication, which of course comes with its own complications. And she wanted to check in and see if there was another way to understand what was going on in her body. And so she flat out asked. And this woman said, and you told her no, she was not in menopause. And I said, yes. And she said, well, but the scientist said she was. And I said, I understand, but I can only tell you what I see. And she said, well, did you know the next morning she woke up with her period? And I thought, isn't that amazing? Isn't that wonderful? Right? That here, after 12 years, opening up to the process, not the words that passed between us, because they're just mechanical sounds that we give meaning to, but underneath those words are intentions. Underneath those intentions are emotions. Underneath those emotions is a basic fundamental human awareness. Underneath that, there is a consciousness. Underneath that, there is the power that creates worlds. And when we align ourselves to the stillness of being, then it goes before us to make the crooked places straight. So whatever emotion, whatever thought, whatever karma, whatever it is that was informing the functioning of the body, changed and restored harmony. So medical intuition is the direct observation of the anatomical functioning of the body, and being able to say, well, there's this flowing here, and I see this scar tissue, or this organ is doing this, or on and on and on. Right? There's a blockage in this vein in the heart. There's a valve in the stomach that is stuck open. There is a issue with circulation, or you're deficient in this mineral, and this is causing this, that, and the other thing. All of this kind of very specific, measurable information is all accessible via skillful use of medical discernment, medical intuition. But when we open up and allow ourselves to be instruments of divine functioning, then something else can happen as well. So there's a lot of information on the website about medical intuition. I invite you to check that out. If any of you have questions, I'm going to stay around for a few minutes and answer a few questions. I know that some of you have books that you would like me to sign as well. I'll be happy to do that. But then if through the week or something, there's some other questions, go ahead and just send Elizabeth a note. And if it's something that can be answered rather succinctly, I'd be happy to do so. All right. But anyway, thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful evening and hang around for a bit, okay? All right. Be well.